Okay, so we're going to start off with exporting. So say, for example, I'm a small US company and I have an innovative product. Let's just say I was in a hotel this last weekend and there was like these kind of buttons, these kind of covers for the buttons you put on the buttons on the elevators, and they were self-sanitizing. So you didn't have to clean them, and they would automatically remove any kind of germs or coronavirus. But at the same time, I'm only a small company. I know there's demand for my product in different countries, but I really don't know what I'm doing, and I don't have the money to start setting up export operations. So what I might do is I might employ an export merchant. An export merchant is just a trading company. It will buy my goods and then sell them, sell them, for example, in the Indian market. So they would just, they'd buy my goods, take a cut, take a markup, and then sell to a different market. An export agent, what we'll do is it will usually kind of represent multiple manufacturers, and then they will kind of help negotiate foreign purchases for you. So they might, there might be a whole range of companies selling like elevators and elevator accessories, or companies selling, health products. And they would actually, they would have a copy of our catalog and prices, and then they would actually directly go and sell our products. And the third category is an export management company. And this really is a company that just almost acts as my exporting arm. I would pay them a certain amount of the business, and they would kind of act as an extension of my own company to sell my products. Now, the next type of exporting we'll talk about is cooperative exporting, often called piggyback exporting. An example of that is in the beer industry, because we all know that there's been a lot of consolidation. There's only a few big players now. There's, Miller Coors, there's InBev, Budweiser, and they're all kind of slowly merging together. But what a lot of these big companies will do is they often want a range of innovative craft beers. So they will actually sell, third-party craft beers through their distribution system. Distribution systems in alcohol are all important. So they would sell a certain amount of product of other companies through their distribution system, and that other company would be piggybacking on the distribution system. So I might be a small craft brewer in the US, and I might piggyback on Miller Coors' distribution system. Now, the final thing is, obviously in all of these areas, I've got to pay a little bit of money, a cut of my profits, to these third-party firms. If I feel I have enough experience, then I just go and I just go ahead and I export myself and keep all the profit for myself. The next example, I'm going to talk about licensing. So we could, the book example was, Starbucks actually licensed some of its coffee brands to Nestle, because Nestle is a big drinks kind of, I would describe it as like, consumable products. They will sell them in the supermarkets, and this is not Starbucks' expertise, packaging up goods to sell a large scale in supermarkets. So Nestle just licensed some of Starbucks' intellectual property, licensed the brand name in order to sell these kind of prepackaged goods in supermarkets. The example I'll give is with computer chips. Now, all of you have cell phones, and all of you pretty much, all your technology in your home will generally have an ARM chip, ARM, which stands for Advanced Risk Machine. And this was actually developed by a British company, Acorn, in conjunction with Apple, and to develop computer chips. And these chips kind of, because they were kind of efficient, they had lower power needs compared to the Intel chips, they tended to be used in a range of consumer products, in cars, in vacuums, in kind of lighting systems, anything where you need a little bit of intelligence, and certainly in smartphones. And they're increasingly being used in computers. So they're actually being used, the next generation of Macs will have one of these ARM chips. Now, ARM don't manufacture the chips themselves. They basically go with this kind of licensing model. They license the chips to manufacturers. They decide, okay, we employ lots of PhDs. We're very good at developing chips. We don't know how to actually produce efficiently at mass scale. This is not what we do. So, they're a smaller company. They don't have the manufacturing resources. And then they kind of license their product. So sometimes with licensing, if you have a company ready in a different country, licensing is actually sometimes quite a good thing. If I'm a small drug development company, I can license to a major pharmaceutical company, say in China, and it'll allow me to get my drugs out quickly without building any factories. The only problem is, say for example, I license my product to the licensee in China. They also license a similar drug, and what they're doing is they're buying my license so that we're not competing with them. And I'm getting paid per unit volume, and they're not producing anything, so the licensee may not be committed and might have a lack of enthusiasm. And in terms of that, they might actually steal my intellectual copyright or develop competing products, which has been a problem. I think the first example given at the beginning of the chapter was Danone, a French food and beverage company, and they were moving into China, and with this kind of range of yogurts and things like that, and that wasn't really a kind of a licensing, but the kind of the local company then developed similar products. So there is an issue here that you may lose some of your technology if you license it out. You're kind of, the company will build experience, and then they will kind of utilize that experience. So in order to do this, we need to have good patent protection. We need to sure all our goods are patented. We need to be very, very careful about who we actually select in order to if they have experience in like licensing other products, and we need to be very kind of careful with our contract. We might want to specify that they may have to produce a certain amount of the product, otherwise we give the license to somebody else. They're not allowed to develop competing products for the next 10 years, etc., etc. This is not a law class, but just having some of these basics in there is actually very important. Okay. So the next thing we'll talk about is franchising. And I actually have a list of the top franchises in the US. And the idea with a franchise is, if I'm a franchisor, so if I'm McDonald's or KFC or Marriott, I can actually have a lot of stores, and other people are taking the risk for me. They're taking the risk of building a store in a certain area. I will charge them a certain amount of their income. I might provide them with some of their basic food ingredients. I'll provide them with the branding. I'll provide them with the marketing. And the idea is that the franchisee, and quite often the franchises in the US are started by immigrants to the US, they're going to be, they're going to be a lot more committed than a salary employee. They really want to make it successful because this is their own business. So you can see some of the major ones here. Actually, another example, I won't go through in detail, but Dunkin' actually got in a little bit of trouble. They had a lot of lawsuits with their franchises. They had very specific ways that you had to sell Dunkin' Donuts, and they were known for being very litigious towards their kind of their franchisees. So if you're a franchisee, there's actually a risk there. You have to keep a certain set of standards for the franchisor. You have to do things in a certain way, otherwise you could actually lose the franchise. So that's just kind of franchising in general. And obviously, if I have a McDonald's or a Subway have been very successful because they only, require a very small amount of initial capital from the franchisees. Obviously, a Marriott would require a lot more capital. The idea with franchises is we can get a certain amount of revenue, but we're not taking a lot of risk. And people are motivated because, it's their own business, it's their own profits. And also the fact that if we franchise abroad, You know, we don't have to deal with the corrupt government officials. We don't have to deal with a lot of the transportation problems. The franchisees have ways of getting around this. What's the problem? Obviously, we're giving away most of our revenues to the actual franchisees. You know, there may be kind of limited infrastructure. People might understand what franchises are. It might be quite hard to set up franchises. Even if we have certain rules, you know, our franchises must sell certain products at certain times. Quite often in international countries, they're going to be unenforceable. And, you know, as I said, we may get into issues with, you know, poor performance, people doing things that, you know, would not be considered acceptable in the US. There may be certain cultural issues if we have a certain way of working. Say, for example, McDonald's or Burger King, that might not work in other ways. And also, you know, you've got to be very careful. I think in the US there was complaints from Jimmy John's franchises that Jimmy John's were allowing them to set up really close to each other, so they were kind of cannibalizing the business. So quite often we will actually employ a master franchisor and we'll have one company abroad and they will manage the franchise system for us. You know, the advantage is they will have experience in kind of in managing franchises in that country. The disadvantage is there's another mouth to feed. They will take a little bit of profit and the franchisees will take even more profit. Okay, so next we'll talk about joint ventures. I'll just have a quick break. Okay, so joint ventures are kind of an interesting topic. Just to give you kind of a few examples, we've already talked about the kind of, you know, the Renault-Nissan alliance. And there's kind of a thin line between a strategic alliance and a joint venture. A strategic alliance is where you have two companies who are just trying to get synergy together, while a joint venture usually has more of kind of a concrete kind of manufacturing or concrete kind of business aspect to it. So let's kind of give a couple of examples. The first one for the book was like Coca-Cola and Nestle. And again, Nestle have experience in getting goods into shops and supermarkets. And they got together to create a range of instant teas. And they thought they were kind of having trouble competing with Unilever in that segment of the market. So they thought, you know, we combine Coca-Cola's specific drinks expertise with Nestle's kind of large distribution system, and we can compete satisfactorily with our competition. Another example, and this is Boots, this is a major chemist in the UK, and they're pretty much the same as Walgreens. They do slightly different things. They have more in terms of like things like opticians. They have a lot of very well-known private label brands. For example, Boots are well known for their range of cosmetics called Number 7, which is a very successful private label brand. So they may be slightly upmarket of Walgreens, but they're very similar. And this joint venture actually, you know, ended up with Boots being bought out by Walgreens. Okay, so just kind of go through a few of the definitions. A cooperative joint venture means that we're working to do business with each other. We maybe co-brand some of our products. An equity joint venture means that we actually create a new company. I might have 50% of this company. You might have 50% of this company. And the idea is if you have different expertises, like in the examples I gave before, we can get a degree of synergy. And we can share our resources. As I said, you know, quite often you may have a distributor. So say, for example, you were a craft beer producer and you didn't have a great distribution network, you may try and do some sort of a joint venture with one of the big players in order to get access to their distribution network. And again, going in international markets, if you're doing a joint venture with a local firm, it does give you a degree of, you know, local knowledge and local contacts, which will really kind of help you not make errors and really help you kind of work within the country. Now, what are some of the problems with joint ventures? Well, we each might have different ideas about what the joint venture should be. One partner may think we should, say, for example, we're selling we're having a supermarket or some sort of retailer. One partner may go for price leadership. Another might have more of a slightly high-end strategy. And sometimes if we have these differences, we maybe have differences over money, differences over intellectual property right. This can lead to a problem of a lack of control and a lack of trust. I.e., I don't fully control what's going on with this joint venture, and I may not trust my partner. And this can lead to examples like in the book with Danone and Wahaha, where there was a complete lack of trust. Wahaha thought that Danone were not putting they were selling their own products separately through a different joint venture, and Wahaha were also selling their own range of products. So it was kind of a very strained relationship where neither party trusted the other party. And this, we won't go through it in detail. This is just different kind of objectives that we can have for the foreign partner and the Chinese partner. But I won't go that into detail. Okay, so how can you have a good joint venture? And again, it's kind of common sense. You need to have a partner that you consider trustworthy. There needs to be clear objectives. We need to have okay, we're going to aim for a price leadership strategy if we're a retailer, or we're going to aim for a certain niche in the market. If you have a joint venture and there's employees from both companies, your companies could have very different cultures, and there can be different international work cultures between countries. Quite often I've seen this done with cross-cultural employees. For example, I worked for Dow Jones in Asia, and they employed a lot of, for example, Britain or American kind of Asians who were between the two cultures. We need the top management to commit to have respect for one another. That's kind of and to have buy-in to the joint venture and take the joint venture seriously. And sometimes it's a good idea, just build things up slowly. So if you're a retailer, slowly, incrementally build your retailer stores. If you're a manufacturer, just slowly build up your product line. And the things when you start, it's a good idea to have a launch team with people from both companies. And then we can decide what our strategy is going to be. How do we manage our company? How do we deal with the money? And how do we structure the joint venture? Okay, and Starbucks were very successful at this. They actually had successful joint ventures in China with local partners. And they actually spent a lot of time searching for their partners. And they looked for companies that had kind of shared values and a similar corporate culture, and also had experience operating the style of, what we call small box, just small stores that Starbucks are known for. They have a lot of local knowledge in the real estate and in business, and they've been able to do similar things before in licensing brands or concepts. Okay, so wholly owned subsidiaries. Basically, what's the advantage? I won't spend a lot of time. Well, you get all the money. And there's two ways of going in. As I showed you the little example before, you can slowly build up infrastructure yourself. Very difficult because you have to build your supply chain from scratch. You have to deal with suppliers from scratch. Or you could have an acquisition. This will give you access to the local market and will actually get your foot in the door and get you local contacts. The disadvantage of this is that the company you actually buy might not quite fit into your business model, which is why, as we said, Target moved into Canada, had a lot of problems because they built a retailer with stores that were too large in the wrong locations. So what are the benefits? Yeah, we have 100% control. We control the brand. We control the strategy. And it kind of shows a local market. If we move in to a market, that we're strongly committed to the market. If it's a joint venture, well, we might sell our proportion of the joint venture to the local partner like 5 years later. So we're not showing as much of a commitment. And again, we control the marketing. We control our brand image. This will allow us to have a more consistent brand image all throughout the world. And we control the product quality and the product sourcing. What's the problem? Well, think of all the things that can go wrong. Our company could be nationalized if we're in Venezuela. If we have an economic crisis, we've got nobody to share the costs with. And, just generally, we don't have knowledge of the market. So we find it harder to do business. We don't understand the business. And sometimes this can cause issues. Even in the US, which is a relatively open country, I remember when InBev bought Budweiser, there was a lot of criticism because this was this kind of iconic American brand. And also, we can be antitrust. Now, what antitrust means is if your company gets too large, too much of the markets, it can create a monopoly, and that's not good for the market. So things like, cell phone companies. We don't want one single cell phone company because then they could jack up the price of plans. The same with any kind of infrastructure company or any retailer, in fact. Quite often, if you become too large, then that can be an issue and it could be kind of blocked by an antitrust ruling. Okay, and this slide kind of summarizes some of the advantages and disadvantages of these different modes of entry. And I won't go through these in detail. You can read that. I've summarized most of these, but it just kind of lays out, for example, franchising, we have less investment, but we don't control the quality control. We have a lack of control in the market. So I won't go through every single one of these. I want to keep these videos reasonably, but most of these, after what we've covered in the class, is pretty much common sense. Okay, so sometimes our strategies might actually evolve. Okay, so we may at one stage decide to go in the market with one market entry strategy, but that strategy may actually evolve. So to give an example, India used to completely ban single brand retailer. So what's single brand retailer? Well, Coach Purses is single brand retailer. I.e., I have a shop just selling Coach Purses. So they loosen that up. So if I'm Coach Purses, then I might have previously just licensed my products to an Indian retailer, but I now might have opportunities of a different mode of entry. Another example was Hershey's. They started a joint venture group with a Godrej Group in India in 2007. And the idea was, this company would help produce Hershey's chocolate. But their partner was not very enthusiastic, didn't have much experience in the business. So in the end, Hershey's got fed up and just bought them out. So again, they changed their mode of control to wholly owned. A good example was the Walgreens Boots Alliance. Originally, it was intended to be a strategic alliance, but with some equity ownership by Walgreens. But in the end, in order to get economies of scale, the two companies actually decided to merge together. So there's lots of different reasons why we'll change our entry strategy. So a few there, once we kind of increase our knowledge in the market, we may go for a higher risk strategy. We may understand the market. We may not think that, for example, India is as risky as we once did. We may have a lot of employees from that country, and we may have more experience dealing with the government. So here's an example of some kind of recent deals, and this is actually going in the opposite way. This is Chinese companies acquiring in the US and other countries. So you can see that Volvo, Smithfield Foods, we've probably heard of those, Pirelli, the tire manufacturer, NextGen, and Syngenta. So it's just showing that this can often go the other way from developing to developed nations. Here's an interesting. This is a little bit out of date. This is the story of Walmart's expansion, but I've got a list of Walmarts in the world, list of Walmart. So you can see, for example, Argentina, they have 92 Walmarts, and Walmart first opened their retail operations in 1995. We can see what they did in Mexico, for example. And they acquired this supermarket called Cifra, which was one of the major supermarkets in Mexico, and they changed it to Walmart de Mexico. Okay, and we've got similar things from Starbucks and McDonald's. This was kind of quite a cool thing. You can see that this is kind of a world map of Starbucks. It's a little bit out of date of Starbucks operations, but it kind of shows, you know, where they source various things from all over the world, and also where they have the stores. And again, we've got McDonald's. You can see, again, the global expansion all through South America, all through, definitely through Europe, and throughout the Asia Pacific. And they have a few, you know, North Africa and South Africa, but they haven't quite expanded to most of Sub-Saharan Africa yet. Okay, so, you know, when should I enter a foreign market? And again, it's kind of a common sense decision. For a US relay, you know, kind of retailer, it is just going to be, my market is saturated. I can't really grow in the US anymore. I'm generating, it's a Walmart, I'm generating a lot of revenue from the US. What do I do with this revenue? Do I return it to shareholders? So I go to a new market. Another thing, it might be competitive. You know, if I have a new drug, there might be a need in that market. So again, it's additional revenue. You know, another reason might be, okay, I'm Walmart. I see I've got growing competitors like Tesco in the UK. It's probably time to like hit them in their own market and kind of, you know, compete with them in their own market. So again, there can be a certain kind of strategy aspect. So there's just lots of different, you know, reasons to decide when I actually move into a new market. And again, this is more Walmart. Okay, but when do I leave a market? Now this can be a little bit more difficult, and these are the reasons. I'll give you an example for each. So sustained losses. During the kind of last recession, McDonald's in Iceland, there's a great deal of currency volatility, and basically the Icelandic currency dropped. They had a financial crisis in Iceland, but they imported their beef from Germany, so it became increasingly expensive to import beef, and so there was no profit in the foreseeable future. So at that time, McDonald's moved out of Iceland, and they probably thought, you know, if this was China and it had 1 billion people, it would probably be worth keeping a presence. But this was just a very small market. A small market not making a profit, we just move out of it. This, I thought I'd give you a classic example from when I was a very little kid. And this is kind of premature kind of market entry. This was like Atari versus Nintendo. And there was this huge kind of video console kind of explosion in the early 1980s. But eventually, there was like, you know, just too many consoles, the poor quality games, users were moving more to home computers, and then there was like this just huge crash in the market. So maybe the market was a little bit too soon. Another fun example was that video I showed you for the homework of the electric car, the Sinclair electric car in the 1980s. It was just really just a bad example all around. So there can be general premature entry, but there can also be premature entry in a certain market. You know, I maybe move into Vietnam 5 years early, before they have proper, you know, infrastructure. If I'm a retailer, for good infrastructure for retailer. So sometimes it's like, if you're moving too late to a market, your competitors get ahead of you. But if you move in too early, the market is kind of not ready for you. The consumers don't have the buying power. The infrastructure is still rather undeveloped. So here's another example. Foreign banks entered Russia in the 1990s, but then there was the huge financial crash in Russia, you know, due to the drop in oil prices, and the Russian economy really crashed. So a lot of these foreign banks just moved out from the market. And they also thought Russia was going to become more democratic over time, which was not really happening. So these foreign banks just moved out. So they kind of entered the market a little bit too soon. Ethical reasons. I was going to say, notice how university campuses have Pepsi machines. I would kind of state that. Notice how university campuses in rather liberal states have Pepsi machines. Pepsi got in trouble in the 1990s because they were doing business in Burma, where there's a boycott going on. They also got some trouble in South America because of some issues with unions. So they've been Coca-Cola got in issues in South America in the early 2000s with issues with unions, and there were a lot of boycotts of Coca-Cola on campuses. Intense competition. This was Walmart in Germany or Walmart in the UK. They thought they could go in and do what they did in the US, but the German supermarket industry with like Aldi, Lidl's is very competitive and very price sensitive, and in the end, again with buying these rather poor stores, this does not look like a Walmart store. They just decided they had to leave the market. And sometimes it's like, well, we're not, it's not that we have to move out of a market, but there may be better markets. For example, Gap decided to close 20% of its US stores and move into what are called Tier 2 Chinese cities. So it's just the big Chinese cities beyond Beijing and Shanghai with fast-growing economies. And Gap saw a lot of potential in these cities. And, we're not going to abandon the US market, but just didn't see the growth in the US than in China. So we put some more of our resources in China. And this was Tesco in Egypt. This was Tesco, the UK supermarket in the USA. I've already talked about this example. And in the end, they just didn't quite get the product right for the American market. They almost became like a discount Trader Joe's. And they confused the shopper with lots of British goods. Also, Tesco was struggling at home at that time, so they decided to concentrate back in the UK market. So they withdrew from the US market. Okay, so what do we do when we exit the market? Well, we've got actual costs. We've got supermarkets, we've got factories, we've got to dispose of, usually cheaply. If we abandon the market, if we abandon a market in a recession, then that hurts our brand. It shows that we're not committed to the market, we don't value the market. And it can also signal potentially, poorly to other markets. If we're in Asia and we move out of, say, for example, the Philippines, then people in other Southeast Asian countries are going to be worried. They think, are they going to move out of us next? So it may be a case that we lose business opportunities in our existing markets because people aren't sure that we're fully committed to the market. So what do we do? And once an economy rebounds, if it's a recession, then we lose long-term opportunities. So what can we do? Well, we do our best to kind of salvage our business. We maybe move out slowly, and this can be painful. But say, for example, we're a business services, we might migrate our customers to a competitor, because even though we've helped our competitor, we've still got happy customers. And those customers, if we ever move back into the market, they might consider being our customers again. So it seems like counterintuitive to help our competitors, but in terms of keeping our brand image, this might be something to do. Okay, so that's it for Chapter 9.